Welcome to GLOBEWATCH with me, Charles EBUNE, from the Office of the Resident Representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee here in Yaoundé, Cameroon. This week, the 11th day to commemorate the World Humanitarian Day was marked globally with a remembrance of the 21 United Nations officials attacked back in 2003 on August 19 in Baghdad, Iraq, by terrorists, including the special representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Sergio Vieira de Mello, who of course was killed in the course of the attack. Around the world today, plus 825 million people are in some form of hunger, while the United Nations Refugee Agency says since 1945, plus 17 million people are refugees. So, question, what number of people need humanitarian assistance in the world today in an environment marked by a global sanitary challenge, COVID-19? Olivier, Guillaume, welcome to GLOBEWATCH.
Thank you.
If you look around the world today, it's roughly 11 years ever since the World Humanitarian Day was enacted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. The last statistics from the United Nations Refugee Agency indicates that plus 70 million people in the world are in need of refugees in the world. Does that number correspond to the number of people in need of humanitarian assistance worldwide?
Well, unfortunately, there are many more people in need of humanitarian assistance today because you have refugees, but you have also stateless persons, you have also internally displaced persons, so people who cannot cross the border are still in their country. And as of December 2019, the Global Humanitarian Overview projected that in 2020 there will be 168 million people in need.
In need of humanitarian assistance?
In need of humanitarian assistance, which means saving life, relieving suffering, and maintaining human dignity at all costs.
If I have to spread the map of the world here, we'll realize that there are so many countries and so many zones in the world, of course, which possibly have the highest number of people in need of humanitarian assistance. Can you paint a picture to me of those countries where the number of people is larger in need of humanitarian assistance?
Indeed, unfortunately, you have many countries in South Sudan, case at point, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where you have a growing number of displaced persons, but you have the largest single country crisis in Yemen, where 80% of the population are in need. You also have the biggest refugee crisis in the world, which is the Syrian one, with 5.6 million Syrian refugees in the region, and 6 million Syrian displaced inside their country.
How do you qualify the humanitarian situation in the world today in 2020, in the era of COVID-19?
I will say the global situation is complex and precarious, because we have more conflict, more wars, we have terrorism, and you have also natural disasters. There is a deepening effect of the climate change, which, as of course, is one of the causes of displacement today. You have people living countries where there are no rains anymore, there is no waters, living from the north of Africa, going up deep to the south of Africa. And then in addition to all of this, as you rightly said, you have the pandemic COVID-19, which is a global pandemic. We have not seen this for many years. And everybody is speaking about the sanitary impact of the COVID-19, but there will be also a huge socio-economic impact on the people and increasing poverty in this world.
Well, when you look at the event which generated World Humanitarian Day was a very dark day back on August 19, 2003. What does that compel you when you celebrate or you mark or you observe World Humanitarian Day 11 years on?
Well, you mentioned the attack in Baghdad, but unfortunately, a few years after the attack in Baghdad in 2003, we also had the attack in Algiers, almost forgotten today, not with 21 deaths like in Baghdad, but with 41 deaths. This was the 11th of December 2007. So you have these things, and then more recently, everybody heard the attack in Niger on the humanitarian workers from an NGOs. And here in Cameroon 1 week ago, there was a humanitarian worker who was killed in the northwest region. So we are more and more exposed. We are exposed to attacks. We are exposed to killings. We are exposed to kidnapping. We are exposed to, you know, when I started with the United Nations, there was almost no attack against the United Nations. But nowadays, we are a target. So we are exposed to this, but we are also exposed to the COVID-19 pandemic, because you know that the best way not to be contaminated is to observe physical distanciation.
Since 2003, roughly 5,000 people, humanitarian workers, have been attacked. Roughly 481 of them have died. When you look at the statistics globally, which, according to you, is the worst enemy to humanitarian work in the world today? Terrorism, conflict, or natural outbursts like floods?
I would say that we are more exposed to a conflict war zone. So when there is no peace, you are exposed. We are exposed to the pandemic, but we can observe social distancing, we can take precautions, so we can use prevention. But you cannot use prevention against an attack. You mentioned the number, 483 people only in 2019 who were attacked, 124 kidnapped, 125 wounded, and 234 killed. So you see these figures are showing you that 2019 only was the most violent year for many years in terms of targeting the United Nations.
Let's put this year's theme into context. What message did the United Nations intend to market this year for humanitarian activity through their theme, which was chosen?
The theme of today is real-life heroes, because of what I just said, that we are exposed, that you have humanitarian workers who are embracing a career, like me, but you have also many other humanitarian workers who are doing it for free, just because humanitarian work is about human helping human, you see. So from the moment that humans are helping human, there is need to increase solidarity. There is need to understand that we need to do more for the people who are deserving it because of what I just said. So this is the message that United Nations wants to pass during that day, that let's not forget that there are humanitarian workers, humanitarian people, helping other people who lost everything, who lost a shelter, who lost education for their children, who are going into deep poverty, who don't have water, who don't have sanitation, and we need to think about these people.
And do you think that this message this year really went across successfully when we are seeing a lot of polarization in terms of international solidarity? There is even a withdrawal of some member states in humanitarian activities, expenditures. Do you think that the message has gone through, especially to the stressed humanitarian communities?
The message, we hope that it will come true, because you know, we are going to to face a wall one day. You know, the situation, as I said, is complex, precarious. We have more conflict than before. We have a deepening effect of climate change. We have more wars, more conflict. So the message that you want to pass is that we need to continue. We need to continue thinking about the human being, about the others, and not about ourselves. This is the message we want to continue across the border. And we think that we need to continue to pass this message regardless of the fact that some people don't think about it.
At least 3 billion people of the world's 7+ billion individuals have gone through some form of confinement because of COVID-19. Just how stressful has the coronavirus been on humanitarian work?
You know, during the pandemic, let's just see, for instance, my case. I was supposed to arrive here in early May 19, and I only arrived on the 16th of July because I was confined in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And many of us could not join their post. Many of us could not take their leaves. Many of us were confined. I just had a colleague yesterday who called me from Panama that she is confined since March 2020, and we are in August. Can you imagine? She can only go out once a week, 1 hour, to do some shopping. So in terms of, we are doing our work like usual, but at the same time it's very different from the past because we cannot approach, you know, we are working by essence with human beings, but we cannot approach them. We need to do things remotely. We need to, I like to go to the field, but I need to make sure that before going to the field, all measure will be taken for not being contaminated, but also not to contaminate the persons of concern. So in terms of stress, it has affected a lot of colleagues who could not take leave, could not see their families, etc.
To what extent has the channel to provide humanitarian assistance to those in need, to what extent has that channel been perturbed, been delayed, or been shattered by the closure of the airspace, the maritime space, strictly controlled by governments today?
It has a huge impact, of course. Because, you know, when we are providing, for instance, cold relief items such as plastic sheeting or plastic nuts, tents, etc., the closure of border has an impact because everything becomes more difficult. Also, the livelihood program that we are putting in place to help refugees and displaced persons to take care of themselves had been affected by the COVID. Because when the COVID started, everything was about the sanitary response. We had to assist the government to build their capacity in terms of sanitary response. But at the same time, a lot of refugees were losing their jobs because of the COVID. And today, many refugees lost their only source of income. Many refugee children were dropped out from school because schools were closed. So the impact in terms of humanitarian consequences is huge, and we will need now to take this into account for next year's program. I
just listen with a lot of melancholy, the figure you provided of people in need of humanitarian assistance in the world, plus 160 million people globally. When you look at the budgeting to provide assistance in the era of COVID, where economies are almost in complete recession, starting from the largest humanitarian assistance providers in the world, the UK, France, the United States, Brazil, countries which host the highest number of refugees, some who are equally in need of humanitarian assistance, like Turkey and all others. Everybody is entering the form of nationalism. Are you resource stressed at this particular moment?
There were our donors, or traditional donors, understood that there will be a problem with the COVID-19 pandemic and that there will be need to assist countries who were in need of this response. And we got funding. We got funding, additional funding during the COVID pandemic to assist the
About
states.
how much? Yeah.
But it depends from each country, and I will not go into this detail. But what I can tell you is that there was a response. The problem is not the immediate response, it's how we are going to continue assisting people who deserve it next year.
When you look at the humanitarian assistance channel, have you had layoffs because of the crisis?
Not yet. As I said, on the contrary, we got some additional funding, but it will come. And we need to be prepared. And we need to pass the message to the persons of concerns that we are going to hard times. Because we cannot just let the people think that things will be like before. No, we need to be prepared, and we need to do even more to fight the poverty in which people will go. Because it's not only the conflict, the war, all of this has an impact on the daily life of the people. And humanitarian assistance is important. Humanitarian aid is important in emergency situation, short-term help. But development aid is also important. Because if you save lives, but you don't have the second component, the development aid, which is supposed to replace the humanitarian help, then we are going to have a huge problem. People need their life to be saved, they need to send their children to school, and they need to be in security, but they also need to have a job.
Can you paint a picture to me of the humanitarian situation in that country, which has faced multiple crises of recent, Ebola, COVID-19, and other sanitary challenge. But beyond that, it has been a sustained period of political crisis, wars since independence in the 1960s. I'm talking here of areas like Ituri, Goma, and other areas, Kisangani.
You know, the problem we are also facing today, and this is why I was saying that the situation is worsening, is that before we used to have one crisis in one typical country. Now we have countries facing multiple crises. You mentioned the Democratic Republic of Congo, with a crisis of internal displacement. Also, it's a country, a huge country, with a lot of neighboring countries, and many of these neighboring countries are producing refugees. So Congo has more than 500,000 refugees in the DRC, Central African refugees, Burundian refugees, Rwandan refugees, South Sudanese refugees. And in addition to this, you have floods, natural disaster, and then the Ebola and COVID and cholera pandemics. If you take the example of Cameroon, before there was only one crisis, the one of the Central African refugees. Now you have the crisis in the east, Adamawa and north of the incoming influx of Central African refugees. Just the last 2 weeks we have received 148 new refugees. You have the attacks of Boko Haram in the far north, provoking internal displacement and refugees from Nigeria. You have the northwest-southwest crisis. You have displacement within Cameroon. And you have, in addition to this, the COVID-19 crisis. And I could give you many other examples, but I will just give you one more, is the case of Lebanon. 300,000 homeless people in Lebanon today, 5,000 injured. So these countries was already
because of the last
explosion, blast in the port. So, you know, these countries was already facing a huge economic crisis. We have witnessed this in the media. In addition to this country, these few people know, but they were also receiving a lot of refugees from neighboring countries. It was the country with the highest number of refugees per capita. And now you have this blast. People need to be treated. There are no hospitals anymore. So this shows you that we are going in a situation where several countries now are facing multiple crises.
Why do you decide to use the word complex throughout the interview to qualify or describe the humanitarian situation globally and even locally?
Because it's more and more difficult to address it. If you have, for instance, only floods, you take all your energy to find shelter, to provide assistance, and that's it. You don't need to prepare a program for repatriation and all these things. Okay? But when you have multiple crises, with usually not a humanitarian solution but a political solution, when you have conflicts, as long as conflicts is not solved, we are going to face the consequences of the conflict and the people crossing borders. UNHCR cannot do anything about it. UNHCR can only save lives when you have crossed the border or when you are inside the country, because we can provide you some relief and some assistance. So the problem now is that it's complex because you need to find different solutions for each of the crises. When I was in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there were people coming from Central African Republic and Chad because they could not feed their cattle. These were herders coming from the north to the south. This is very different to solve than, for instance, a conflict, for instance, to help refugees. There is no solution which fits all. For each situation, you need to adapt, address. The moment that humanitarians are doing the same thing, no matter the crisis, we are usually failing.
Oh, the World Food Programme indicates that roughly close 825 million people in the world suffer from some form of hunger. When you look at the multiple challenges we face in the world today, when it comes to those in need of humanitarian assistance, what do you consider to be the greatest threat to their existence?
After more than 25 years with the United Nations, and the fact that I realized that the situation is every day more and more complex, I realized that in fact it depends on the context. Your question depends from the context. If I am in Italy, I need to make sure that people who are in need of asylum can reach a safe haven, because it's about reaching the coast of Europe. If I am in Cameroon, 428,000 refugees in Cameroon, it means that the problem is not a country who does not allow the people to come in. So protection is provided by the government of Cameroon. Even when borders are closed, the government in Cameroon allows people to come in. It's the same in many countries in Africa where I've been working. Africa still remains very generous when it comes about receiving refugees. But we have other problems. You see, we have other problems. And in Africa, I will say, so I will respond to your question with my experience in Africa. For me, it's really about poverty. And if you manage to help a refugee or a displaced to make a living, then you will allow this person to take care of him and herself, and a lot of human rights violation will be reduced. For instance, why would a young boy be recruited by armed rebels if he has a job and a car? Why would a young girl try, or a young boy go to sex survival if he is studying?
You have well-established British nationals, French nationals, just like Saudi nationals, from some of the richest families in the world, who ended up in being either terror agents or leaders of terror groups. Ben Laden did not come from a poor family. Somebody may provide you that answer, that your argument is not tenable.
But it might not be tenable in the example you are giving to me. But my experience, I'm a humanitarian worker, and I'm giving you my experience in this humanitarian world. I met with many refugees. You know, most of the letters I'm receiving from refugees, I'm receiving something like 100 letters per week from refugees in Douala, Yaoundé, etc. It's much more about social and economic rights than about civil and political rights.
Olivier, Guillaume, thank you very much indeed for being guest on GlobeWatch.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
You're welcome.